Principal Shannon Sharp was aware of exactly how long the cowboy had been standing at the corner of the building. It was her job to know, and though he'd never done anything, he couldn't keep coming around school grounds and watching. She'd employed her excellent detective skills to figure out who he was. After all, she didn't want to alienate a parent, but she also couldn't risk the safety of her students and teachers if the man had a restraining order against him or wasn't allowed to see his child. Thankfully, this cowboy didn't fit any of that, wasn't married, had never been married, had no children. He'd dated one of her second-grade teachers for a brief time last year, and Shannon suspected the poor guy wasn't over beautiful, bubbly blonde Claire. Still, she told herself, as the children continued to practice their dance festival pieces, he can't just show up at school and stare. If a parent saw. She turned away from the sixth-grade class, doing the cha-cha, and clicked her way toward the far corner of the building. Her necklaces jangled as her heels made sharp noises against the blacktop. She fiddled with the hummingbird ring on her middle finger as she approached, the only sign of her nerves. "Sir." She paused out of his reach and touched her dangly, sparkling earrings. The man startled as if he hadn't noticed her approach. He had black hair that extended into a pair of sexy sideburns all the way to his chin. His eyes reminded her of her favorite black tea, and his quick smile made her relax her weight onto her right foot. "Ma'am." He swept his cowboy hat off and tipped his head in acknowledgement. Shannon wished she was meeting him at one of the town's summer activities, or the community country line dances, or a church function, because he was gorgeous. Tall and broad, with biceps that showed his muscles when he folded them across his chest. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" she asked, her voice betraying her frantically beating heart. She told herself she would never react like this to a parent, but she already knew this man didn't fit that bill. So her erratic pulse and sudden hopes were justified. "Oh, I..." His gaze flickered to the open blacktop and back to hers. He seemed to sink into her gaze, and Shannon's hand lifted and pressed against her heart, like she was saying the Pledge of Allegiance. "I've seen you around a few times," she said. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." True regret lanced through her, because she'd very much like this man to stay, maybe come to her office where she'd close the door and learn more about him. She'd seen him at church with another cowboy from the horse ranch up the canyon and had learned everything she needed to know but his name. And Shannon didn't live in small-town Utah because she disliked cowboys. Quite the opposite. Problem was, she'd dated every available man during the 6 years she'd been in Brush Creek, and she'd given up hope of finding someone here. Her disappointment that a transfer hadn't come through this year dried up. Very aware of how unreasonable she was being, she added, "And I think you should stay away. I don't want to have to call the police." The man fell back a step, alarm entering his eyes. "No need for that. I'll go." He turned and walked away without looking back. A pang of renewed disappointment sang through Shannon, and she sighed as she turned back to the activity on the blacktop. Why did she run off every available man? It didn't matter. She hadn't gotten a transfer this year, but she'd been at Brush Creek Elementary for 6 years. Next year would be number 7, and if she didn't get a transfer then, she'd know something was wrong with her performance. But her parent and teacher surveys had been positive, and she'd never received a negative supervisor evaluation. With her future almost certainly not in Brush Creek, she didn't need to worry so much about dating. But Shannon also knew she wasn't getting any younger, and her biological clock seemed to be ticking in her ears, louder and louder every day.